Today, we're going to learn about flyers. Now, I've already talked in the other video about typography and a little bit about what these flyers mean, but now I'm going to actually demo what my thought process might look like for a particular client. Years ago, one of the first clients that I had was operating a bakery, and one of the things that I'm sure came up at some point that I've long since forgotten was some sort of grand opening flyer of some kind. Now, the demo that we're going to do today, I've already pre-selected a bunch of assets. If you'd like to follow along, those assets are linked so that way you can follow along with us. The skills that you learn throughout this demo will carry over very neatly into your assignment this week. So first things first, let's start with a new canvas. Now, when we do this, you need to talk with your client and understand what their use case is. In this case, I know that she actually wants to be able to put this flyer up out in the world, which means that it's a print project. And so the way that looks is it's going to be measured in inches, not pixels, because what we want is a standard sheet of paper, the sort of thing that you would print on any ordinary printer. Now, when you have a standard sheet of paper, it comes out of the printer looking like 8.5 by 11 inches. 8.5 and 11 looks like this, standard old letter size piece of paper, the kind that you find in every single office printer everywhere in America. Thing is that when you print on this on a typical office printer, the kind that you find like from the Staples or whatever can't print all the way to the edge of the paper. And so you end up with something that's sort of like this, where if you tried to print it, you'd have this little tiny edge of about 1/4 of an inch on all sides because the printer can't reach the edge. The printer is not smart enough to be able to deposit ink directly on the edges of paper. That's why when you see something where the ink has gone all the way across the edge of the page where there is no edge like that, this is called printing with a bleed. And the way that works is that a commercial printer can't print all the way to the edge either. Because it would be messy. The ink, particularly if you're doing commercial printing, it's using toner. And so that toner dust would just sort of fall on the floor. There'd be a huge mess and it would be terrible. And the way that you do it is you actually create a larger canvas. Instead of printing for 8.5 inches wide and 11 inches tall, you actually add 1/4 of an inch to each side of the page. When you add 1/4 of an inch, that ends up with a 9-inch tall canvas and a 12 inch in height and then 9 inches in width. So you've added 1/4 of an inch to each side. Then, after you've printed it, the printer will then just cut the edges off. And so the result is the equivalent is if you had printed on an office printer, and if you were to just cut the 1/4 inch off. The thing is that if you did that, it's annoying because you'd have to cut it all off, but also that you would have a smaller size piece of paper. You'd be wasting the paper. You still waste the paper with a professional print project. The difference is that they do it with perfect scoring on each side because they have special equipment to do that. Another reason why printers can't print all the way to the edge is because each sheet of paper tends to go through the printer trays and it wiggles a little bit back and forth. Some pieces of paper might go in first or a little further, faster than another sheet of paper, and so it just can't print all the way to the edge. So for our purposes today, when doing a print project, we're going to do it with a bleed. And in order to set that up, that means that we need to create a 9-inch wide by 11.5 inch tall sheet of paper. I think I said 12 inches before. I meant 11.5. You add 1/4 of an inch to each side. There's 4 sides to a piece of paper. You get 9 by 11.5. That's in inches. I also want mine in portrait orientation, not landscape. That's hamburger, not hot dog. Or excuse me, hot dog, not hamburger. What am I thinking? And then the resolution. The resolution in this needs to be 300, and because there's 2 numbers that you need to be aware of. Resolution refers to the number of pixels that appear per square inch on a canvas. When you print, particularly commercially, it's 300. That's the same whether it's a magazine or most virtually any print production that you can possibly think of. Even most office printers at this point will still print at 300 dots per inch. Kindles also, as a screen, will display at 300 dots per inch. Some higher end displays like iPads and iPhones, like newer iPhones, also newer Android phones, will display at higher resolutions than that. They'll display as much as 224 pixels per inch up to 300 and something pixels per inch. But generally speaking, 300 is for print because screens will downsample images in a way that print does not, because print is physical and we're holding it in our face. We don't have to zoom and all those sorts of things. So if you're making something for screens, so it's like a Facebook ad, an email mock-up, or some sort of graphic that just gets shared around on Facebook or whatever, 72 DPI. If you're going to print something for our purposes in this class, it's going to be 300 DPI. So we got 9 by 11.5 at 300 pixels per inch. And I'm going to go ahead and create this graphic. I'm going to change the color mode later for demonstration purposes. Typically, for print projects, you would create CMYK color. That stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Try not to think about the black too hard. It's K for black. You know, as you would think. Trust me. 9 by 11.5, 300 pixels per inch. I'm going to start with RGB color and I'm going to hit create. And you will notice that we have a nice, neat little sized piece of paper on our canvas. I'm going to increase the size of my Photoshop window a little bit. As before, and as always, I have a Finder window over here that has some pre-made things in it. And I've got that handy so that way I can use that as my scratch pad. And I got Adobe Stock open behind me here in another window. Now, the thing that I need to do is I need to create something that promotes this grand opening. And so I picked something earlier with Adobe Stock that actually had this like layout of various vector icon graphics, sort of a build your own cupcake sort of a thing. And I thought it was kind of cute. And it gave me an idea for something that I wanted to see if I can try to accomplish. Now, this is in Illustrator, and we're not going to be doing a whole lot in Illustrator this month, or this semester even. But I wanted to sort of show you and give you some experience with this, because from time to time, you're going to have graphics that end in .ai. These are Adobe Illustrator graphics. Sometimes you'll see these as .eps. And for our purposes today, I really just need to come in here and grab one thing. And it's super simple to do this. If I have both windows open here on my screen, I can come in here and I can click on this, but you'll see that it's sort of selected everything. I don't really want that. That's not uncommon. If I just double click in Illustrator, I can sort of then go a layer deeper into the group and I can grab the one that I want. And I think I've decided that I would like, I don't know, number 20. I like number 20. So I'm going to take number 20. I'm going to click it. I'm going to drag it. I'm just going to go bloop right over into Photoshop. Now, it's put this bounding box around there, and it doesn't look like it's doing anything, but that's because it's a white graphic on a white background. If I hide the background, you can see that it's there, and it's right smack in the middle. It gives it a name in the layers palette as a vector smart object. That's fine. So I'm going to stick that right there. Command T will enable me to do a transform on this. And if I rotate to the side and I hold the shift key, as I do, you will notice that Photoshop will helpfully sort of increment this in sort of modest 5 or 10 degree increments. I want this for right now at 90 degrees, and I want it to be quite a bit smaller, but not a lot smaller, about like that. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to leave it right there. Next, I'm going to grab a text box, and I want my text box to be something about like that. And it's going to put in some lipsum text in here. That's not super helpful for me, and it's also hard to see still. So I'm going to come in here. If it's unselected and you're in here, or if you're not in here, you can double click on the T. You do not want to double click on where it says layer 1. You want to double click on the actual T icon. You'll come in here, put your cursor, Command A on a Mac or Control A on a PC. You can select all that, and then you can sort of, I don't know, pick a color. I kind of like that, sure. And so then I'm going to come in here, and it's also pretty hard to read, so I'm going to set my character palette to auto. If you don't have that over there, you can see my other video, but you can go under the window and select character. And I also need to, gosh, what else is wrong with this? I need to make it smaller so that way I can manage it a little bit. So I'm just gonna make it smaller for now. And I know that from my client's email, they're having a grand opening and she has a list of flavors. Funny story, the first time she sent me the email, she said, hey, attached is the list of flavors, but there actually wasn't a list attached because people forget things like that all the time. So I had to email her back and I got my list. The list of flavors that she has includes chocolate. I'm just going to type these out in here. There we go. She's got chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, coconut, key lime, and lemon. Now, I want to come in here and I need to start formatting this to be just better. And so I'm going to come through here and I'm going to browse through some fonts and I'm going to see if I can't find one that I like. I think I've settled on Sugar Punch as my font of choice for this. For now, I may change this. Keep in mind too that I already had a bunch of fonts installed on my computer. You can access a bunch of new fonts from fonts.adobe.com. And as I've said in the other video, there are certain fonts on the no use list. And if I see them, it's going to be a return to sender. Okay, so now I've got my text in here and I need to make some of this stuff bigger. I need to make most all of it bigger actually. And so the longest word in here is the word strawberry. So I'm going to come in here and size it up until it looks like strawberry is about to wrap. And I did this, by the way, by highlighting all of it or part of it. And I come over here to my character panel and I can make it bigger by just clicking on this little T and dragging to the left and the right. I'm going to do this for all of them. There. Now I have all these sized up about the same, and they're different sizes because the words are different lengths. The problem is that this now has sprawled far too out of control and it's far too tall on my canvas, and I don't like it. So what am I going to do? So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to start by scrunching some of these things down. I got too much space in between the words, and some of these are just too tall, like vanilla, which is a boring flavor that is taking up too much space, and coconut, which is a flavor that no one likes. And so it's taking up too much space. So I'm going to come in here. I might leave chocolate mostly the height, but there's an option in here. You'll see this capital T with 100% next to it. You can just drag it down and it will sort of flatten them out, almost like you're stepping on it. And then if you remove the line height from it, you can also make a little more room in between each of these. Strawberry is my favorite flavor, so I'm going to leave it mostly the same. There we go. Now I have all of my text filled in a little bit here, and I think that's pretty good. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to make the icing top the same color as this, but it's a vector smart object, and there's a quick and easy, dirty way to do this. Down here in the bottom right-hand corner is the effects panel. If you click on where the vector smart object is, which you can double click and rename to icing in my case, you can click on the little FX button and you'll get this little list in here of all sorts of different options. Most of these things do about what they look like on the tin. The bevel and emboss adds a bevel and emboss. A stroke is a fancy word for outline. Inner shadow adds shadow on the inside of something. An inner glow adds a glow on the inside of something, and so forth. Drop shadow is pretty common. I use it a lot. Stroke's pretty common. I use it a lot too. And the other one that I use a lot is a color overlay, which just sort of fills something with a color. And so when you come in here, by default for me, it was set white, which doesn't seem to be doing anything because it was already white. But if I come in here, I can pick a color. But wouldn't it be helpful if I could grab the same color that I used on this font, which is a very dark brown, almost chocolatey, kind of like that. It's kind of a dark purplish brown, actually. So you can just come in here with the eyedropper and just click on any part of the canvas to grab that color. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to hit OK again. So now I have my icing. It's sort of sitting on top like that. It's a little bit wider than I want it to be. So I'm going to grab my icing layer, Command T for transform, and I'm just going to try and scrunch it down. Now, you will notice Photoshop fixes a problem that everyone has hated for a long time, which is that when people drag by the handles that are on the very top or the sides, this would be the 12, 3, 6, or 9 o'clock position, it would generally make things look bad because it would stretch things in weird, stupid ways. And so Photoshop has sort of followed in Microsoft's footsteps and others, which just sort of always defaults to proportionally scaling things down. For my purposes, because it's icing and it can kind of take any shape that I darn well want, you can hold the Shift key and you can override that by holding Shift. And so I want that because I kind of want the height of it a little bit. I want like a big thing like that. Here we go. So now I have my icing. I'm just going to kind of tuck my text under it a little bit. And I might even do the same with my text. I can just grab the whole text box, Command T, and I can do the same thing. I can hold the Shift key and I can drag from the edge there and it can just sort of scrunch everything down. Because if I drag a marquee selection around both of those things, it will select both. Alternatively, I can come in here to the layers palette and I can hold the Shift key and select multiple layers. And then I can Command T for transform. And I can grab the whole thing, kind of like that. And it looks a little bit like a cupcake, doesn't it? But I'm noticing that my text is too tall, right? The icing is it's out of proportion. So I'm going to grab Command T again. But you'll notice as I do this that it makes sizing from the side a little weirder. That's not quite what I want anymore because now it has this perspective. So I'm going to hit Escape to undo that. And I'm going to hit Command Z to go back to this. There was a reason why I started from this very nice position, left to right. And so I'm just going to take this and scrunch it down some more. Grab both. Command T. And I still don't think I like that much. So I'm going to just grab it and scrunch it some more. Just like that. Ordinarily, you would never do this to text. There. Something about like that. Yeah, something about like that. If I hold the Shift and Option key and drag from the corners, I can size up the whole thing. Very good. All right. Whoops, don't want to do that. Make sure that you center this there. Something about like that. That's dead center because Photoshop has given me the guides for it. Now, let's say that I want to add a background to it. So the easy way to do that is to just use a big shape, right? And so I can come over here with the shape tool. It's technically sometimes referred to as the rectangle tool because it's the default at the top. It's the letter U on the keyboard, but that's a keyboard shortcut that for whatever reason, I just never commit to memory. So it's this one down here towards the bottom. You can grab the rectangle, come around off of the side, drag a big box, and it will fill it with the last color that you used. Obviously this is on the top and I don't want that. So I can just drag it down. Handy shortcut, Command right bracket will move it up. Command left bracket will move layers down. Hold the Shift and it will go all the way to the bottom or all the way to the top. I do not necessarily like that color for this purpose though. And so I need something that is a little more, I don't know, brown. Something dark though. I need something like a nice chocolatey brown. Ooh, I like this. Very good. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so now I have a background, but I also had pre-selected this icing top, which has this icing that I like on the top, but I don't like this sort of brown vectorish color. And so in Illustrator, because this is another AI file, I can open this up. I can come in here and I can start to click and drag, but I can see that there are other layers to it. So I'm going to undo that. And if I drag this layer, I can see that's the thing that I don't want. And so I can just hit delete. I can drag a selection around all of these little things and it will select it. I can click, drag, drop into Photoshop. And it will place it depending on what version. Sometimes Photoshop will ask if you would like to place it as a smart object or as pixels. I always choose as a smart object. Once it's in there, I can sort of position it where I want, which for me was up here at the top. I can size it to fit all the way over to the edge, like so. And I'm going to hit Enter. Very good. Now, this obviously is too light now, and so I need to change the color of it. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click in there, and I'm going to change the color to white. And I think I'll do the same thing. Actually, I don't even know that I want to do with to white. I think maybe I want to grab that shade of white from the icing. Yeah, I like that. I need to come in here and change the color overlay. And by doing so on the effects, I can just double click where it says color overlay. It'll bring this up and I can change the color from that. I can pick one. Okay. Okay. So now I have some text that sort of spells out all the colors. It's looking like a cupcake. It's kind of fun. But I need to put in some useful information about like what, when, where, and how, right? And so one thing that I can do is I can come in here and I can drag another rectangle shape on top. I'm just going to drag it across the bottom about like this. And I want this rectangle to be white. I think it may be, yeah, I think white. Let's make it white. Or maybe make it more white, like that. There we go. So now I have my little rectangle down here. Remember, we're cutting off 1/4 of an inch on each edge. So you want to make sure that you've got plenty of space around the sides, that nothing important is going to get cut off when it gets printed. And I'm going to write, some sort of useful text down here. If I click inside, though, you'll notice that Photoshop kind of takes over. And so if I change the color of this so you can see it, you can see that what it's done is it's actually put the text inside the shape, which cool. Thanks, Photoshop. Didn't really want that. So for what I need to do here, you always want to avoid, in this case, because I don't want text to be really inside the bounding box of the shape, you'll see that it's got the little eye indicator for the text cursor, but it's got a circle around it. I don't want that. You want out here where it's a box. And so I'm just going to drag it out here, and then I will drag it on top later. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to Command A to select all of that. And I'm going to say that Acme Baking Co. And I'm going to make up a address here, 123 Main Street. And I don't know. Yeah, let's do that for there for now. I'm going to shrink this by quite a bit. And I'm going to change the font. I'm going to go browsing again for a different font here in a second, but I'm going to drag this on top because I want it someplace kind of like that. I need something that's sort of fun and on brand for them, but I don't want to use that font because it's a little bit hard to read for this purpose. So I'm going to select it by double clicking my text box over here, and then I'm going to go browsing for a font. There we go. I settled on Balu Bai, which is a font that I have used before, and it's kind of fun because it's nice and soft and kind of bubbly. And I am going to continue to sort of keep this over here. I want it to be big though, and so I don't want it to be too far over. I can't put it all the way to the side because 1/4 inch of that's going to get cut off. So I'm going to put it someplace about like this. Here's a pro tip. I want another text box over here, but I want it pretty much the same formatting. You can hold the Option key on a Mac, that says the Alt key on a PC. You'll see that your cursor, if you have the Move tool selected, that's the letter V on your keyboard for a shortcut. If you do that, it'll put this little shadow cursor back there. And when you do that, you can click on a layer and drag, and it will create a copy. Now, thing is that if you're not careful, it'll start bouncing all over the place, and you want it to be perfectly lined up. So if I hold the Shift key, I can drag it over here and let go, and it'll keep it in nice little lines. Now, I can already tell because what I want to do is I want to put a placeholder in here using the ellipse tool for their logo. And I want it to be something kind of like that. And if I use the same color that I used for the background, it'll look like it all sort of melds in there a little bit. But my text is now covered up, so I need to size down my text. There we go. So now I have them at both 14 point, And I need to change this text over here because I'm also going to include a phone number, just like that. I can add more space in there too. You can use the space bar from time to time. There, I'm pretty satisfied with that. Now, I don't really want this circle shape that's sort of serving as my logo placeholder to sit quite like that. There is a way that you can make this a little more interesting by using another effect, and you can use a stroke. So clicking on my ellipse, click on the FX, click on stroke, which is a fancy way of saying outline. By default, it'll probably come in at black. You can change this. I'm going to make mine white, so that way it matches this white that's right here. I'm going to hit OK, and you can adjust the size down a little bit, like that. You can play with these other options if you would like, but I'm going to leave them as they are because they serve my purpose. Very good. Now, wouldn't it be helpful if this said something like grand opening someplace? And I have an idea for how this might work, but I don't know if it will actually work or not. And so what I'd like to do is try it out. And so I'm going to grab my text tool again. I'm going to create a box. And I'm going to say grand opening. I'm going to select it, change it to white. Now, what I'd like is for it to be big, kind of like that. Remember, 1/4 of an inch is getting cut off on either side of it. Grand opening. I'm going to keep with this Baloo font too. I want this underneath my icing, so I'm going to command left bracket my way down there. Interesting. Okay, let's keep going here. I'm going to duplicate this layer down here by just alt dragging my way each time. Now, as I do this, Photoshop will give me some helpful guides to sort of line it up and keep the spacing. You can make this faster by clicking and holding Shift and clicking on each of these layers so that way it has selected all of them. Hold the Alt key or option on a Mac, and then you can drag 3 at a time. Haha. There we go. Now, that's a lot, and that's not helping anybody in here, but you'll notice that I have multiple different grand openings in here, and I'm just going to select all of them by holding Shift and just sort of clicking on the top to the bottom here, just like you would if you were selecting a bunch of files in your File Explorer. And I'm going to reduce the opacity by a lot. Something about like that. I'm at 2%, right? So that's a lot. And I kind of like that. I think that's cool. I almost wonder if maybe I shouldn't try to stagger this so that way the space between grand and opening wasn't always sort of in that same spot. Maybe it should be something sort of like this where I can maybe stagger these things back and forth. I'm going to try that. Now that I'm looking at it, I've decided I don't like it. So I'm going to Command Z my way out of it. Why do I like this more? Because it's easier to read and it gets the point across faster. But one thing that I can do to make people really take notice of this, because if they're going to be noticing it, I want them to stop and stare. Free cupcakes. You'll notice that I'm typing in there, but it does not look like it because my text color is the same. It's too large, and it's underneath my icing. So Command Shift right bracket on my free cupcakes layer here. We'll bring that to the top. I'm going to continue to change this a little bit. I'm going to use the same font color that I did here in the background. I'm going to make this bigger. Very good. All right. So now I've got free cupcakes. I've got my little icing that I didn't have to make. I have grand opening back here. I have my text. I have my cupcake. I'm going to move this a little bit, actually. I'm going to hold Shift and pick this up if I can get it. T. to grab both of them and transform. I'm just going to move it. Gosh, I don't know. I think better right there because I need to include some information, right? So I need to include a spot for a QR code, which I do not have yet, but you could grab one online to fill the space. Or in my case, I'm just going to put a little white box there because it's mostly white anyway. This, by the way, is a useful spot that I could type in it by grabbing the type tool, clicking inside, and just writing QR code. Command A to select it because, again, Photoshop's not really showing us anything useful. Color, make it smaller, and I'm going to center it sort of like this. I don't want this to be distracting for purposes of our client, so I'm just going to make it gray because it's not actually going to say QR code in there. And I'm going to make it a nice standard font, Helvetica. Hit enter 1 or 2 times to center that in there. Fine. That'll hold our QR code until we can get that generated. Now, what else do I want to say in here? Well, I've got room over here on the side if I wanted to, or I could leave it as it is. I could move my icing and cupcake down to the side a little bit, put the QR code in the top. I have options here if I wanted to pursue it. I think I'm almost inclined to sort of leave it as it is. I think that this is fine, and I think they'll like that. But I do want to take one more time to add a little bit of flair to our free cupcakes in here. So you'll notice I have the text up here. I've selected the text. I can even add gradient effects to this. And so what I can do is I can add instead of a color overlay, I want to add a gradient overlay. And when I do that, whatever default colors it comes up with is what it comes up with. But when you come in here to this layer style window, go ahead and click on this little gradient color window right here. And when you do that, it's going to bring up this gradient editor. Now, this is a little cumbersome to look at, but generally speaking, you almost always leave this top set of points alone. It just indicates where the transparency change is. But if you click on the color stop on the left, that's the color that's currently on the bottom. And so you can change that to something else. If I change it to a color that's already in there, it might make this a little hard to read, right? And so I want something that maybe looks, I don't know, a little more colorful, but it needs to be something that sort of resembles what you would expect on a nice cupcake. So maybe something, I don't know. Let's see if I can't play around with some colors here. There. I ended up on kind of this nice strawberry-ish hot pink color because it's bright and it's kind of fun. Quick tip for gradients, if you have a struggle trying to find colors that work, set both color stops to the same color. So what I ended up doing here was I liked this color. You can select the hex value down here. This is that little hash sign down there. It's the code that's often used by web developers because it's how you define a lot of colors in CSS, for example. If you highlight that, Command C or Control C to copy, hit OK. Come over here to the other color stop, click on the color. You can paste in that spot, and then you'll have both colors the same. Then you can just drag down. That's always a useful way to make the same color darker. Or if you start from the same color, you can drag up, which to me wasn't far to go, and so I didn't like that. And so if you start from the same color again, you can just come straight across, and you end up with a color that's pretty good. I kind of like that, just like that. A lighter color that works pretty well. So I'm going to hit OK. Now, while I'm in here, maybe I can add a stroke to this too, because that sounds like fun, right? And so what are my options in here? It's like, well, the color on the white doesn't really work very well because it's already pretty white. I can make it some of this icing color. Maybe I grab the brown, right? Maybe. So if I start with the brown that I've got, this like sort of chocolate color, if I up the size, I can sort of make this sort of nice bubbly cupcake thing. I can change the position. So currently by default, it always goes to the outside of the character. Inside actually would make this totally covered because what it's doing is it's actually adding the stroke to the inside of the layer. or I can do it where it centers it, where it kind of adds it to both the inside and the outside at the same time. I don't use inside and center very often. I almost always use outside. You can change the blend mode and the opacity. The opacity just makes it less, which I think makes it look ugly. I think I decided that it looks better with 24 pixels of a border or stroke around there. I kind of like that. So I've got my little flyer. I have some space in here that I can use to add more details if necessary. I could make this cupcake smaller if necessary. I could tell people sort of what the offer is, and probably should do that. So maybe I come in here. You'll notice that if I try to grab another text box, by default it will go into the text that's in the background, this grand opening text. And so what I need to do is I need to create a new layer and then create a text box outside of that. There we go. Drag it in here, size it down. This is where I could add information. There. Now I have some text in here about some criteria for it. It's about 12 point, which is fine. I can sort of tighten this text up a little bit. I can make it line up with my cupcake. You'll notice that I have it left aligned here because it lines up well with the QR code, which is probably going to have some sort of border on it. I can sort of plop this in a spot like that. I don't know, maybe I center it. I don't often like to center text for too much because it tends to get hard to read. There. So now I have something worth showing to somebody, and I think that a client might actually enjoy looking at that. What are some critiques in here? It's like, well, sometimes some of the flavors are a little hard to read underneath the icing. So maybe something would have to change with that. That's fair. A person could argue that grand opening is a little hard to see. That's fair. The client may just not like the colors. Who knows? But in this case, it's a pretty good start for a first draft, I think. And I'm going to do a file, save as. Again, if you get this save to Creative Cloud thing, just say on your computer. And then you can come in and save it. I want you to save yours as your last name -week02.psd. Do the same thing for a file export. You'll notice, however, if you export this, you would export it as a JPEG. Clients may not necessarily want that as a JPEG. Typically, you would save as and do a PDF document. But for purposes of class, and because PDF documents have a higher resolution and a file size for Canvas, we're going to do file, export, export as, and we're going to make it into a JPEG. We're going to do this because we want to actually shrink it down a little bit in the file size, just so that way we have a little bit easier go with it on Canvas. And just do this. I'm going to hit export. I'm going to save it. And now I've got a JPEG. Perfect.